Her ex-boyfriend invited her to his wedding to shame her,
Baby, send her the wedding invite.
Taesung said to his fiancée. She looked at her screen in shock, and then she drove home angrily. But on the day of the wedding, she didn't come alone. She came with a Korean billionaire and a convoy. If this story already has you feeling some type of way, then you know what to do. If you're just seeing our channel, smash the subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because here we tell the best stories and we give the best twists and turns. And do not forget, click the link in the description below to join the waitlist for our free ebook, How to Attract a High-Value Man Without Chasing. To really understand how Elena Stefan got herself in this position, we'd have to start from the beginning. So let's take you back to the beginning. Elena grew up in a home in Los Angeles that fell apart too soon. Her mother, Stella, was a Black American woman. Her father was Latino. For a while, the house was full of his laughter, full of the Spanish words he taught Elena in the kitchen, and full of the sound of him dancing with Stella in the living room on Friday nights, for no reason other than the fact that the week was over and they were together. He was the kind of man who made every room feel like a celebration when he was well. Elena was only 12 years old when her parents separated. Her mother left her father because he was a drug addict. Even at 12, before she had the words for it, Elena was already asking the question that would shape everything she became. Why did he have to go towards drugs for comfort? What would make a person do that to themselves and to everyone who loved them? That curiosity, that burning need to understand people, was the thing that drove her to become who she was. Stella moved them to Indianapolis, a small town and a smaller life, but at least it was safe. At least the thing that had been slowly destroying their home in Los Angeles could not follow them there. 3 years passed. 3 years of just the two of them, and Elena started to notice something in her mother that frightened her. Stella was getting depressed. She overworked herself, barely slept, and ran on empty, yet the bills kept coming regardless. She would sit Elena down and tell her the mistake she had made was marrying the wrong man. Elena was just a child, but she always knew the right thing to say. "Mum, you couldn't have known he would lose himself after you married him. Some things don't happen because you were not smart, but because life happens." She would hug her mother and remind her she was a role model. That was who Elena was, even at 15, the one who steadied everyone else while carrying her own weight in silence. She decided it was time to sit up, time to stop watching her mother carry everything alone. She started babysitting after school. She started buying her own groceries, her own school supplies, taking as much off the table as a 15-year-old could. Stella didn't reduce her workload, but now, the work she did started to look sufficient. No credit loans to pay, no unpaid bills piling up. Everything in the finances started to fit in the way it hadn't fit in years. Elena did that. At 15 years old, Elena had already become the person her mother leaned on without meaning to. Stella would sit with her in the evenings, and Elena would not push. She would just be there, present and patient, the way she had learned to be, and slowly, the real things would come out. The bills that kept arriving no matter how hard Stella worked. The loneliness of building a life from scratch, and the guilt about the marriage, the move, and the version of her daughter's childhood she had imagined but could not provide. Stella would talk, Elena would listen, and by the time the evening was over, something in Stella's shoulders would have released. She always looked at her daughter afterward with the expression of someone who has been given a gift they did not know they needed, and cannot fully explain how they received it. She did not know yet that what she was looking at was a therapist. Elena did not know it either. She just knew that sitting with people while they hurt was the most natural thing she had ever done. One afternoon, Elena came home from school and found a woman sitting on the floor of the hallway outside their apartment. It was Mrs. Reyes from the end of the hall. An older woman, Elena, had walked past every day for 3 years without knowing anything about her life, except her name and the color of her door. She was sitting with her back against the wall and her hands in her lap, crying quietly, the kind of crying that has been going on long enough that it is no longer urgent, just present. Elena stopped. She did not say, "Are you okay?" because the woman was clearly not okay. She did not say, "Can I help?" because she did not yet know what help looked like here. She just sat down on the hallway floor beside her, and she waited. After some minutes, the old woman started to narrate what was disturbing her. Elena listened and gave her advice. 40 minutes later, she went inside. She told Stella what happened, and Stella looked at her for a long moment. Something crossed Stella's face that was the shape of understanding her daughter for the first time. Her daughter's need to fix how people feel meant she had the attributes of a therapist, though she didn't know it yet. Elena was 17 when she walked in one evening and found her mother sitting with the phone in her hand, tears streaming down her face. She sat beside her. "Mom," she said softly. She waited. "Your dad is dead," Stella said finally. "He overdosed." Elena stared at her mother in fear and shock. 6 months before that call, her father had checked himself into a rehabilitation program. The last update she had received was that he was doing well, that when he completed the program, he would be able to visit. Elena had held on to that quietly. She had not let herself fully hope, because she had learned what hope cost when it broke, but something had opened in her chest anyway. It was something small and careful that she did not want to name, and now he was gone. He had been getting better. He had chosen to get better. And then something happened inside him, something she could not see, reach, or understand, and he had gone back to the thing that was killing him. Why? She thought. Why did he go back? That question was what sparked everything Elena decided to be in the future. She decided she would spend her life helping people understand what they felt, so they wouldn't do something that hurt them and destroyed everyone who loved them. She didn't want anyone else to go back to the thing that was killing them because they couldn't find another way through. Her first patient was her own mother. Stella's depression moved faster after the news. Elena wasn't sure if it was the hope that had been building, the hope of her husband getting better, of some version of the family coming back, now suddenly gone, or the guilt of having loved someone like him, or the fear of being completely alone with a daughter she couldn't afford to put through college. Whatever it was, Elena could see her mother slowly leaving, and she needed to bring her back. The burial was one of the worst days of Elena's life. Seeing her mother cry that hard made her cry just as much. Her grandparents were there. Everyone who had ever loved her father, even though he wasn't the best person, stood at that grave and cried. But they were not mourning the man he turned out to be. They were mourning the man they had hoped he would become. They were mourning the life they had wanted for him, the son, the husband, the father, the brother, the uncle. They were mourning who he could have been if the drugs had never found him. And that was its own kind of grief, the grief of a hope with nowhere left to go. 3 weeks after the burial, Stella started pulling away from her daily tasks. Maybe it was the reality of things being just her now, truly, finally, irrevocably, just her. That was too much to hold. She stopped doing things she had done every day without thinking. She pulled away from herself. Elena was 17, but she didn't think like a child anymore. She read books and studied human behavior. She wanted to understand what her mother needed, just as she wanted to understand why her father had found solace in something that destroyed him. Every morning, she made breakfast and brought it to her mother's room. She used those mornings to sit at the edge of the bed and remind Stella that there was no task ahead of her she hadn't already been doing. This reality of being alone wasn't new. She had been living it even before her father died. "How do you go to college, Elena?" Stella asked, tears pouring down her face. "We will figure it out like we have done for over 5 years, Mum." Elena spent hours in that room listening to how Stella felt like she was failing her, how she wanted so much more for her daughter, and how she regretted marrying a man for his looks. Finally, after listening and understanding her mother's pain, Elena would speak. "Mum, you've sacrificed everything for me. Don't lose yourself because you fear you're not doing enough. Don't blame yourself for other people's choices. You can't control people's choices." As Stella listened, she could feel the weight coming off her shoulders. She looked at her daughter with so much pride and wondered where she got this skill, this ability to listen deeply and say exactly the right words. After about 3 hours of Stella being the child and Elena being the parent, Stella felt better. She got a breath of fresh air again. She hugged her daughter and promised she would be a better mother. "You can try, Mum," Elena said, "because you're already the best." When Elena left her mother's room, one question sat with her. How would she go to college? She understood she could not afford it without a student loan, and she wasn't sure how she would pay it back. She did not want to start her life drowning in debt, so she accepted that a loan would be the very last resort. She wanted to be a therapist. She already had the mind for it, but now she needed the credentials, the training, and the full understanding of everything she had been doing by instinct since she was old enough to sit beside someone in pain and know what to say. She wanted to help people be better versions of themselves. She didn't want anyone else to resort to what her father had. She started applying for scholarships. She had no preference for country or city. She was ready to go wherever opportunity existed. She applied, and then she waited. 6 months passed, and she had almost given up entirely. She came in one evening after a long babysitting shift, tired and already calculating the next thing on the list of tasks. Then there was Stella, sitting in the living room with an open envelope in her hand and a smile on her face that Elena had not seen in so long it took her a full moment to recognize it. "I couldn't wait." Stella was practically squealing. Wait for what, Mum? Elena's eyes went wide as her mother thrust the envelope toward her. She read it once, then she read it again. Seoul and Seoul College. Full scholarship. Tuition, housing, and books were all covered. Everything was there. All she needed to sort out was her clothes and food. She screamed. Stella screamed. They jumped in the middle of that small Indianapolis living room. Two women who had been holding on for years, who had counted every cent, stretched every meal, and carried each other through things that should never have fallen to either of them. The sound they made was the sound of something finally releasing, of hands unclenching from a grip that had started to feel permanent. Out of every scholarship she had applied for, Seoul was the only one that answered. Elena had not chosen Seoul. Seoul had chosen her. Somehow, that felt like it meant something. She started learning Korean that same evening. Every night before bed, she studied. She was not going to arrive in a country and not be able to speak to anyone. She refused to be unprepared. The day she was going to leave, Stella finally broke down. Her baby, the child who had been forced to become an adult too soon, was leaving. Stella had wanted everything for her and more, and now she was getting it. But watching her go was the hardest thing she had ever had to do. She watched Elena pack her clothes and tried to stay calm. It worked for a while. She even helped her pack while they talked about Seoul, filling the hours with words so the goodbye wouldn't arrive too fast. But when they got to the airport, and it was finally time for Stella to hold her daughter, she couldn't be strong anymore. Tears poured down her face as she held Elena and told her she loved her. She wanted her to know it hurt to watch her go, but it filled her with joy to watch her thrive. Both things were true at the same time, and she needed Elena to understand that. "Keep being you, baby," she said, still crying. "Mum, please stop crying," Elena said quietly, her own heart cracking at the sound of it. "These are tears of joy, baby girl," Stella said, smiling through the tears now, wiping her face. "I love you." And then, she let her only daughter go. Elena didn't cry until she got on the plane, and then she cried so much. The thought of leaving her only family, the thought of arriving in Seoul where she knew absolutely no one, of how alone she was going to be, how far away Indianapolis would feel when she needed it most. She cried until the crying was done. And then she reminded herself of the goals. This was temporary. All she needed was the certificate. She just needed to go to school and become the best therapist she could be. Everything else would come after. Seoul was not a city that eased you in. It arrived all at once, the moment Elena stepped out of Incheon Airport, and the city hit her like a wall of organized noise, organized movement, organized everything. She had grown up in Los Angeles and then Indianapolis, and she thought she understood what a city was. Seoul taught her she did not. It was not the size of it alone, though the size was staggering. Buildings stacked against buildings, highways layered over highways, neighborhoods bleeding into neighborhoods, with no apology and no pause. It was the way the city moved, with intention, with a pace that made her feel slow, even standing still on the pavement outside the arrivals hall, with her 2 suitcases and her backpack. She had not expected to feel small here. She had expected to feel foreign. She had prepared for foreign. She had spent months learning Korean, watching videos of Seoul streets on her laptop, until Stella knocked on her door to tell her it was past midnight. She had not prepared for the specific feeling of standing in the middle of something enormous and understanding that the enormous thing did not know she existed and did not need to. She picked up her suitcases. She found the bus that would take her to the campus housing. She sat by the window and watched Seoul move past her in the early evening light. She pressed her hand flat against the glass and thought, "Okay, this is where you are now. This is what you chose." Seoul had chosen her, technically, but she had said yes. The campus housing was a small room on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like industrial cleaning solution and someone else's instant noodles. It had a single bed, a desk, a wardrobe that did not close properly, and a window that looked out onto another building's wall. It was not beautiful or comfortable. It was a room to sleep and study in, and that was all she needed it to be. She unpacked carefully. She put her books on the desk, in the order she would need them. She put the photograph of herself and Stella, taken at the airport, Stella's eyes red from crying, both of them smiling anyway, on the corner of the desk where she could see it from the bed. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the room. It was very quiet. She had not understood, in all her preparation, what the quiet would feel like. Indianapolis was quiet. In a way, she was used to the quiet of a small apartment in a city she knew, where the sounds outside were ones she recognized, and the silence was familiar. This quiet was different. This was the quiet of a place where she did not know what the sounds meant, where the voices coming through the thin wall spoke in a language she was still learning, and where the whole city outside her window was continuing its life without any knowledge of her existence. She reached for her phone. She called Stella. It rang 4 times, and then Stella's voice came groggy, confused, entirely herself. "Elena, baby, it's 2 in the morning." She had forgotten the time difference and apologized. Stella laughed the laugh of a woman who is half asleep but completely glad to hear her daughter's voice, told her to call back at a proper hour, told her she loved her, and hung up. Elena put the phone down. She looked at the photograph on the desk. She looked at the wall. She unpacked the rest of her things, set her alarm, turned off the light, and lay in the dark of a room in Seoul, telling herself what she had told herself on the plane. Just the degree, just become the therapist. Everything else is temporary. She said it until it felt true enough to sleep on. The first month in Seoul was the loneliest she had ever been in her life. Not dramatically, not in a way that broke her, just in the way that loneliness has when it settles in for the long term, when it stops being acute and starts being ambient, like a sound you cannot quite locate, but can never fully stop hearing. She kept getting the time difference wrong. She would calculate it correctly, and then forget in the middle of a long day, calling Stella at 2 in the morning, Indianapolis time. She would wake her up and apologize. They would both laugh, and she would call back at a proper hour. It happened 3 times in the first month. Stella never once complained. She just answered every time, groggy and warm, because her daughter was on the other side of the world, and she always had to pick up. The Korean grocery store overwhelmed her in a way she had not anticipated. She was good at navigating new things. She had been navigating new things her whole life, but the grocery store had a particular kind of overwhelm she had not prepared for. The labels she could not read fast enough. The packaging that looked familiar and contained something entirely different from what she expected. She bought what she could identify with confidence and cooked American food in the small communal kitchen at the end of her hall. Rice, the protein she could point to, the simple meals she had been making since she was 14 years old in Indianapolis. She ate alone at the small desk in her room. She went to the library in the evenings, not only because she needed to study, but because it was full of people. Silence, with people in it, was easier to live inside than silence alone. She found a table near the window on the 2nd floor and stayed past the time she needed to, because going back to her room meant going back to the quiet, the photograph on the desk, and the wall. She called Stella every day at the right time. These calls were the best part of her days. Stella would tell her about the hospital, the neighbor's new dog, and the television show she had started, watching everything ordinary, and Indianapolis, and far away. Elena would sit on her bed with the phone pressed to her ear and let herself be homesick for exactly the length of the call. Then she would hang up and go back to work. Elena was exceptional in her program. She had known she would be because she already loved the field. She had been doing this work in one form or another since she could remember. Listening to people, reading the things underneath the things they said, finding the feeling that was driving the behavior. The psychology program gave her the language and the framework and the clinical tools for something she already understood intuitively. It was like being handed a map of territory she had been navigating by feel for years. Her professors noticed her quickly. Not only because she was the only black student in every room, though she was, in most class, but because her answers had a quality that the answers of students who had only read about human behavior did not have. When she spoke in seminar, her professors paid attention in the way professors pay attention when a student says something that makes them think. Her classmates started requesting her as a partner for assignments. Her professors started calling on her even when she did not raise her hand. She did not perform any of this. She just showed up and did the work, and the work did the rest. She did not notice the way people looked at her when she walked across campus. She was always too busy. She met Sun Yu on a Tuesday morning in October. The psychology program had a cross-listed course that semester, an elective that pulled students from the art faculty for one shared unit. Elena had not chosen it for the art. She had chosen it because it fit her schedule, and she needed the credit. She walked in and found a seat near the middle and opened her notebook. Sun Yu sat down beside her. She did not ask if the seat was taken. She did not say, "Hello" first. She sat down, put her bag on the floor, looked at Elena's notebook, and said in English, perfectly accented, American inflected English, the English of someone who had spent significant time in the United States. "Your handwriting is so neat, it's actually annoying." Elena looked at her. Sun Yu was pretty in the way of someone who had always known it, the kind of pretty that comes with a certain ease, a comfort in taking up space, and an assumption that rooms will arrange themselves around her. She was dressed with the specific carelessness that requires real effort. She picked up Elena's pen, without asking, and examined it. "I'm Sun Yu," she said. "Elena," said Elena. American? Yes. Me too. Well, Korean, but I did high school in Boston. She put the pen back. Psychology? Yes. Art, said Sun Yu, which is basically the same thing. It was not the same thing, but Elena did not say so. She took her pen back and returned to her notebook. Sun Yu pulled out her own notebook and started drawing in the margin. Somehow, without either of them deciding it, they were talking in a low murmur before class began about Boston, LA, and the specific experience of being a Korean who preferred English in a Korean university. By the time the professor walked in, they were no strangers. Sun Yu knew Seoul the way only someone who loved a city from the inside could know it. This was the genuine thing about her. Sun Yu knew which restaurants in Mapo-gu had been run by the same family for 40 years, and which ones were tourist traps, dressed up as authentic. She knew the Han River at the specific hour in autumn, when the light did something to the water that made it look less like a river and more like something that had been there before the city and would be there after. She knew a pojangmatcha behind a convenience store in a neighborhood that tourists never reached, where the food was extraordinary, and the owner recognized Sun Yu by her order and did not have to write it down. But most especially, she knew restaurants that sold the best American food in Seoul, and that was a relief to Elena, who had been searching for familiar dishes. She took Elena to these places in the first weeks and showed her Seoul the way you show a city to someone when you want them to love it generously, specifically, and with genuine pleasure. Having someone who wanted to include her, who sought her out, and who knew her name and the sound of her laugh was everything to Elena, especially in a city that had initially felt so indifferent. In those weeks, Sun Yu was the friend Elena had not known she needed. The loneliness that had been living in her since she landed did not disappear exactly, but it moved over. It made room. Having someone who wanted to include her, who sought her out, who knew her name and her order and the sound of her laugh. It was everything to Elena, especially considering the fact she was in a city that did not know she existed. Elena overlooked the edges because the center was warm enough, but the edges were there from the beginning. Sun Yu said the most shocking things and seemed completely unbothered by the fact that Elena was standing right there. Once, while they were talking about LA, Sun Yu told her she would have loved walking around the city at night if she wasn't scared a black thug would shoot her. Elena was shocked. She knew it wasn't only black people who were thugs. The words landed on her like a slap and she said nothing, because they were still becoming friends, and she could not afford to lose the only person in Seoul who felt even remotely familiar. Sun Yu would tell her jokingly that most men in Korea would not be attracted to melanin, and that she would probably have to go back home to find love. Then she would laugh, look at Elena's face, and say she was just joking, and didn't understand why Elena took things so seriously. Elena registered every single one of those moments. She absorbed them, and said nothing, and kept showing up because the alternative was going back to the quiet of her small room and the photograph on the desk and the wall, and she was not ready for that. She was alone. And lonely people make compromises they would never make otherwise. But here is what Sun Yu would never say out loud, what she would never admit, even to herself. She had never thought a black woman could be as beautiful as Elena. She had never thought a black woman could be as beautiful as Elena was. She had spent time in the US. She had met black women there, but none of them had looked like Elena. The perfect figure, the beautiful pointed nose, the face that made people stop mid-sentence, the skin that somehow made everything more striking rather than less. Sun Yu couldn't understand it. She couldn't compute it. She had always been the most beautiful woman in the room, and then Elena arrived and became the most beautiful woman in every room without even trying. To make it worse, Elena was brilliant, the valedictorian, in almost every course she took, including the cross-listed course where they had met. So instead of admitting she felt threatened, Sun Yu did what jealous people do. She found ways to make Elena feel small. Small jokes, small comments, small wounds, dressed up as honesty. The friendship that had started between two people who liked to speak English quietly became one where one friend was so eaten by jealousy she could barely look at the other without needing to cut her down. Elena was an aspiring therapist who could read everyone around her. Everyone except the woman sitting right in front of her. She advised everyone but herself. She had learned to take Sun Yu's insults as simply the normal thing Sun Yu did. She had normalized it. She had absorbed it the way you absorb bad weather when you have nowhere else to go. One day, Elena was walking past a group of boys in the library. She wasn't even looking at them. She had her books under her arm and her mind already on the table by the window where she always sat. The 30 minutes of Korean pronunciation practice she had allocated. The assignment due at the end of the week. She walked past and the murmuring stopped. She did not turn around. Those boys were the most talked about on campus. Everyone had an opinion or a story. Sun Yu had talked about them too, though she claimed she had no interest. There was a rumor that one of them had ignored her when she tried to speak to him, which was not the kind of thing Sun Yu forgot easily. But Elena had never thought to ask about it. She did not care about any of it. She had 1 year left. She had come to Seoul on a full scholarship with one goal, and she was not going to lose focus over campus boys. She was 20 years old and knew exactly what she was here to do. She found her table by the window. She opened her books. She got to work. But Tae-sung was interested in the beautiful black girl everyone at Seoul and Seoul College was already talking about. When he watched her walk past, he decided it was the perfect moment to speak to her. Elena spent up to an hour every day working on her Korean proficiency. She was in the middle of wrestling with a difficult pronunciation when a voice above her corrected her. She looked up, and there he was, one of the 3 boys everyone on campus wanted to know. He was so beautiful, it was almost inconvenient. She looked back at her book and muttered a thank you and kept reading. He sat down. And now butterflies started forming in her stomach. She had never had to think of a guy before. Not like this. Not in a way that made her aware of someone sitting beside her before he had even said another word. This whole feeling of wondering what he wanted, of noticing someone's presence before she had decided to notice it, it unsettled her completely. "I'm Tae-sung," he said, flashing the cutest smile she had ever seen. She stayed quiet for a moment, trying to understand why she was even reacting to any of this. "Elena," she finally said back. "I know your name already," he said, obviously flirting, and she knew it. "The prettiest girl on campus with the brain of a computer. Everyone on campus knows your name." "That's a bit of an exaggeration," she replied, feeling genuinely uneasy at how talking to him was making her feel. "I really need to learn this," she said, pointing at her book. "And distractions will not help me." He looked at her calmly, nodded his head, and stood up. "Elena, I'll see you around, right?" She nodded and looked back at her book. He smiled at how shy she was and walked away. He liked her, and as a playboy, he already knew he was going to get her. Elena told Sun Yu about it on the way to class, and Sun Yu's response was immediate. "He's a playboy, Elena. He'll just use you. I don't even think he likes girls like you." "Girls like me? That's racist, Sun Yu. Even for you." Elena walked into her class angrily. And instead of apologizing to Elena, Sun Yu said she was oversensitive like her people, and Elena decided it was time to give Sun Yu some space, since she had decided to be exactly who she was. They did not speak for weeks. During those weeks, Tae-sung pursued Elena, and the whole campus knew about it. You know, when the finest boy in school is chasing a black girl, the information travels fast, and it travels loud. Sun Yu heard about it too, and could not contain the jealousy. She had tried to talk to one of Tae-sung's friends and had been ignored, and yet it was Elena they were choosing to chase. Elena started falling for him in days. Not because she wanted to. That was the thing. She had not planned for any of this. She had come to Seoul with one goal, and she had been so certain of herself, so disciplined, so committed to the plan, that she had not left any room in her chest for this. And now there was Tae-sung, waiting outside her building in the rain with a ride she had not asked for, bringing her American peanut butter she had mentioned once in passing, like he had been storing her words away for later. Learning her schedule with the quiet certainty of a man who has decided and is simply waiting for her to catch up. The attention, the butterflies, all the things she had told herself she did not need, turned out to be more interesting than she had ever thought. She was in her 20s, but she had grown up faster than most. That attention and those butterflies were things she had told herself she didn't need, but they turned out to be more interesting than she had imagined. There was a night they studied together in her small campus apartment. She was explaining something from her psychology coursework, a case study about attachment theory, about the ways people learn to love based on what they were shown growing up, and she looked up expecting to find him distracted, scrolling his phone, doing what beautiful campus boys did when they had talked a woman into spending time with them. He was listening. He was leaning forward with his elbows on the table and his eyes on her face, and he was actually there, inside what she was saying, following it, turning it over in his mind. He asked her a question that was not a simple question. She answered, and he asked another one. And they sat at that small table for 2 hours and talked about human behavior and loss and why people chose the things that hurt them. And she looked at him at some point in the middle of all of it and understood that she was in serious trouble. This was not what she had signed up for. There was an afternoon they walked along the Han River. It was one of those Seoul autumn days where the light does something specific to the water, the same hour Sun Yu had once shown her, though she did not think of Sun Yu in that moment. She was thinking about what Tae-sung had just told her. that he had watched two sets of classmates graduate without him, that he had never taken school seriously, had only ever wanted the girls and the attention and the easy campus life, and had watched 2 years of people move forward while he stayed still. He said it without shame, just honestly. The way you say something when you have decided the person beside you is worth the truth of it. She did not judge it. She listened, and she asked what had changed, and he was quiet for a moment. You, he said. You're the first person I've ever wanted to be better for. She looked at the river. She believed him. She had no reason yet not to. In less than 2 weeks, it was school news. The playboy Tae-sung was dating Elena. Sun Yu heard it and felt something she did not name. 2 weeks into the relationship, Elena felt lighter, without Sun Yu, no one making her feel like a different species, no comments, dressed as jokes. She had Tae-sung, and for the first time in a very long time, Seoul felt less lonely. But one Monday, she saw Sun Yu in the corridor between classes and felt the loneliness of not having a girlfriend again. She had everything. She had Tae-sung, but she had no one to gossip with, no one to share the experience with, no one to be a girl with. No one to say, I know, I see it, I see exactly why, when she wanted to talk about the way he listened across a study table, like she was the most interesting thing in the room. That Monday evening, Sun Yu came to apologize. Elena forgave her instantly. She had missed her, even though she was toxic. That was the honest truth of it. Loneliness will make you forgive things that a full heart would not. A week later, she introduced Sun Yu to Tae-sung. Sun Yu had come over, knowing full well that Tae-sung was there, claiming she needed to talk to Elena because her father had just been arrested. Elena felt she could not leave her friend for her boyfriend, so she asked Tae-sung to leave and told him her friend was coming. Sun Yu arrived in less than 5 minutes. She had been that close. She had been waiting. She met Tae-sung. She smiled at him, the specific smile of a woman who has just seen something she has decided she wants. Tae-sung smiled back, the way Tae-sung smiled at women before he had made a decision about them. Neither smile was for Elena, but Elena was looking at both of them with the warm, open expression of a woman who trusts the people she loves and sees absolutely no reason not to. She was so happy to have her two favorite people in Seoul in the same room. She did not notice the room shift. Graduation came. Tae-sung finally graduated. He had watched 2 sets of students cross that stage without him, and Elena had been the reason he finally crossed it himself. She had sat with him through the coursework, pushed him when he wanted to coast, believed in the version of him that he had only briefly believed in himself. He was trying, until he wasn't. After graduation, everyone started chasing their goals. Elena called her mother to tell her she had found someone she loved and wanted to build her life in Seoul. Stella was happy for her. Her daughter was thriving. She had found love. She was becoming exactly who she had set out to become. Elena loved Tae-sung so much that she built her entire future around him. She made sure he didn't derail her dream of becoming a respected therapist, but he was the reason she chose to start that dream in Seoul, instead of going home to Indianapolis. He was the reason she stayed in a city that was not hers. She would understand later exactly what that had cost her. That is the measure of how much she loved him. On the other side of Seoul, Jun Woo-han was standing in his office trying to hold himself together. He was recalling everything that had happened over the past months. The worst betrayal, the worst divorce. He could still see Sunjin's face looking at him with hatred. He could still hear her telling him that even if she lost, he would lose too. He could still feel the weight of a child he had loved for 2 months before he found out it was not even his. How could she have hated him that much for something she had done to him? He sat down and covered his face with his hands. He didn't notice when his best friend walked in. Taemin had been sitting across from him for several minutes before Junwoo even realized he was not alone in the room. How long are you going to let this thing hold you down? Taemin asked. Junwoo removed his hands from his face. He understood Taemin was concerned. He just wished Taemin understood that things like this were not something you simply moved on from. What's up? Junwoo said calmly, picking up his pen and going back to the papers that had been sitting on his desk, unsigned for days. Taemin looked at his friend with so much pity it was almost painful. 2 years ago, Junwoo had been the happiest man he knew. Now he was a sad workaholic who had decided to let no light into his life at all. Taemin had tried everything. It had ended in a fight, with Junwoo telling him he knew what was best for himself. So Taemin had backed off, but he had not stopped watching. Junwoo had not seen Sunjin in months, but her scar had settled into him like something permanent. And everyone around him, including Junwoo himself, was suffering for it. One Friday evening after work, Sunyu went to Taesung's house. She told him she had noticed he always seemed lonely. Taesung should have seen it, should have recognized that this was his girlfriend's best friend standing at his door, and she shouldn't be trusted. But he let her in, and that moment he let her in was the moment he went right back to his womanizing ways, like the 3 months of trying had never happened at all. On her side of the city, Elena was pouring herself into her career. More clients, more hours, more of herself going into building something real from nothing, a practice she had started from zero in a city that had not been built for her, where every client who walked through her door arrived because she had earned them. She was doing exactly what she had come to Seoul to do. And after Taesung started cheating with Sun Yu, everything about Elena started to irritate him. All of a sudden, he complained about everything. He complained that she was never home and that her Korean still wasn't good enough, the same Korean he had once found charming. He even accused her of cheating. Everything became a grievance, evidence of something she was doing wrong. The relationship was sliding, and Elena could not understand it. This was not the man who had waited for her in the rain, not the man who had listened across the study table, like she was the most interesting thing he had ever encountered, not the man who stood at the Han River and told her she was the first person he had ever wanted to be better for. Where had he gone? What had she done? She was the therapist who could read everyone in a room, and she could not read the room she was living in. She could not see what was happening right in front of her, because the one thing her training could not protect her from was being the person inside the situation instead of the one observing it. She was the client now, and the client rarely sees clearly. So instead of seeing the snake right in front of her, she went to the snake with her pain. She started telling Sun Yu about how Taesung had changed. The same Sun Yu who had been quietly poisoning Taesung's mind for months. The same Sun Yu who had told him that Elena was cheating, that the reason she was never home was because she was with other men, instead of the obvious fact that it was because she was a scholarship student who had arrived in Seoul with zero connections and was building her career from absolute zero. The same Sun Yu who whispered little racist things into Taesung's ear, that Elena was not like them, that she could not take care of him the way a Korean woman could. And Taesung, easily manipulated, always had been, believed it little by little until he started to despise the woman he had once told he wanted to be better for. Not just because he was entirely a victim, but because it was easier to cheat on her, believing she was doing it too, and he wasn't that much of a bad person. That was the same Sun Yu Elena went to cry to. I don't know what's wrong. He doesn't seem to love me anymore. Do you think I've done something? Sun Yu listened. And then she answered, with every bit of warmth she could manufacture from all the jealousy she was made of. I told you relationships like yours wouldn't work. He's rich, and you're well. She didn't finish that sentence. She didn't need to. I told you to stay home more. Cook for him. Be there for him. It's bad enough that you're not Korean, and you're colored. Do you still want to be a bad girlfriend? No, you shouldn't be like that. Elena listened. She was 23 years old. Taesung was the only man she had ever been with. She was inside, the pain of it, and she could not see clearly from inside it. She mistook the sacrifices she was making for love when they were actually fear. Fear of losing the person she had built her entire soul around. Fear of being alone in this city again. She was willing to make more sacrifices to keep him than to simply let him go. These were the exact things she would have told any client sitting across from her. But this time, she was the client, and she could not see it. Before she left Sun Yu's house, she begged her to talk to Taesung, to help her put in a good word, that she still loved him, that she was still in the relationship, since it seemed like they talked more. Since Sun Yu seemed to have access to him that she did not, she never really stopped to wonder why it was so. Elena started coming home earlier and cooking Korean food from recipe videos. She answered every call on the first ring. She pulled herself away from the work she had built and poured that energy into a man who was spending his evenings with her best friend. But things didn't get better. Taesung got worse. He was now absent. He was the one who stopped coming home on time. He was the one who smiled less and pulled away, making her feel like she was chasing something that moved further back. Her practice started suffering. Clients noticed she was less present. She had sacrificed everything and was getting less than nothing in return. She called her mother. Stella listened to all of it. And then she told her daughter the things she could not tell herself. You cannot force love. You don't have to work for the right love. If he wants you, he'll come around. Don't lose what you can control, which is yourself, because of what you cannot control, which is him. You told me before that we don't blame ourselves for what other people do. You need to take your own advice. Those words landed somewhere deep in Elena. She went home. She cried. She understood her mother now in a way she had not before. Not because the advice was wrong, but because knowing the truth of something did not take the pain of it away. You could hold the right information and still hurt. She now understood why her mother was still hurt, even though she knew she wasn't to be blamed for marrying her father. She wrote in her notebook that night, "It is okay to cry." She wrote it like a reminder she knew she would need again. She went back to her full hours. She stopped pulling herself apart for him. She hosted him when he came, once a week now, sometimes less. And she made excuses and told herself he would find his way back to the man she knew. But while her relationship was the worst thing happening in her life, her practice was the best. People left Elena's safe space lighter than they arrived. Word spread the way it spreads about something that is genuinely good, not with noise, but with certainty. Everyone referred who they knew, because Elena's office had become exactly what its name said it was. Taesung was not just a cheat now. He was a jealous, hateful cheat who let the woman he was cheating with convince him that Elena was trying to outshine him. That was the kind of man Sunyu had turned him into. He could have just left the relationship, but he saw that the only way he could still control her is by holding her close to make her feel pain, which to him was justified because she was simply better than him. One evening, Taemin walked in and found Junwoo drinking and crying. He had had enough. "You need to see a therapist, for heaven's sake. I am tired of this." "I don't need anyone telling me what I feel," Junwoo replied. "You need it so badly. This is already escalating, and as a friend, I will not sit here and watch you destroy yourself. Go and talk to someone. I heard she's very good, and I'm tired of watching you fall away." He walked to the door and stopped. "If you don't try, Junwoo, I'll assume you hate everyone in your life, including me, because you'd rather we watch this than help us help you." He left. Junwoo looked at the card. He could still feel the ache in his chest, that pull toward another bottle, that desire to just drift away from everything. But Taemin's words were still in the room with him, and they would not leave. He picked up his phone. He booked an appointment before he changed his mind. "Elena's safe space," he muttered under his breath, with a full measure of ridicule. He already knew it wouldn't work. Nobody could fix what Sunjin had done, except Sunjin herself, and that was what he believed. But Taemin had a point, and he was too tired to keep fighting the people who were still choosing to love him. The next day, he knocked on her office door and heard a small voice tell him to come in. He stepped inside and stopped. Not dramatically, just the half-second pause of a man whose eyes have just encountered something his brain was not prepared for. He had expected clinical. He had expected someone who would look at him the way doctors look at patients. She looked up from her desk, and her eyes found him, and they were direct and calm, and reading him already, the expression of a woman who had already started understanding him before he said a single word. He could see that she was very beautiful. Her straight black hair, her eyes, the quiet authority she held without performing it. She was beautiful, and he already hated that she was beautiful because beauty was what had made Sunjin a beast. She gestured for him to sit. "Good afternoon, Mr. Junwoo. How can I help you?" she said professionally, looking directly at him, already reading him in a way that told her this was not going to be easy. "I heard you could help me understand what I feel," he said, sarcasm sitting on every word. "That's why I'm here." "And what do you feel, Mr. Junwoo?" "I feel tired of people telling me that talking to other people about the things I lived will help me get better." "So you don't think therapy will help you? But you haven't even given it a chance." She continued calmly. "Your beauty doesn't make me hurt less, Mrs." He was looking for her name. "Miss Elena," she corrected, with a small, composed smile. "Mr. Junwoo, I want you to understand that therapy can only work when you're ready to talk and ready to do the work. I don't know how you feel, but everyone feels something. If you can work with me and feel even 1% better, wouldn't you want that?" He looked at her. She was good, better than he had given her credit for, and he was already annoyed at himself for thinking so. "Tell me what you want to talk about," she continued. "Anything. Honestly, the fact that no one leaves me alone. Everyone assumes they know what's best for me." "Okay, let's leave everyone for a second. What do you think is best for you?" "I don't know. They told me you were the best for me," he said, looking at her directly. "And I can see why. You're trying to deviate from my question," she said without missing a beat. "That usually means one of two things. You're afraid of the real question, or you're simply not ready to start." He stood up. "Mind how you speak to me, Miss Elena. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not answering because this is a waste of my time." She did not flinch. She did not soften. She looked at him with the steadiness of a woman who had decided nothing he said was going to move her. "You wasted your time to book an appointment, dress up, drive here, walk up here, and walk into my office. You made consistent choices because you want to be better, and I want you to be better. But if you don't believe you need this, I can't force you." A pause. From the moment I saw you, I knew you'd be difficult. That word hit him somewhere he wasn't expecting. Difficult. Sun Jin had used that word on him when he raised concerns, when he tried to tell her something was wrong. She had used it like a weapon to make him feel like the problem was him, like he was too much, like his pain was an inconvenience. This woman said it like a fact. I hope you love yourself enough to heal, she said, enough to believe you're worth healing, but don't ever infer that my face is why I have come where I am. If it's your choice to find another therapist, you may do that. She looked back at her book. He walked out. So besties, take a deep breath. Now tell me, do you think these two people will find their way back? Tell me so far what you like about this story, and don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. Also, I'm feeling really bad for Elena. What about you? If you've not hit the subscribe button, then what are you waiting for? Smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because this story is about to get really interesting. Let's get back to the story. She hated his guts. She sat in her office after he left and could not fully explain it. She had dealt with difficult clients before, resistant ones, defensive ones, men who walked in with their walls already up and their arms already crossed. She knew how to handle that. She had handled it today. But something about him had gotten under her skin in a way she was not used to, and she sat with her pen in her hand and stared at the page and could not fully account for why. She wrote his name in her client notes and underlined it once. He got in his car and called Taman before he had even started the engine. Every beautiful woman is not a good therapist, Taman. And don't forget, it's because of a beautiful woman I need the therapy in the first place. He was practically shouting. He did not notice he was practically shouting until he heard Taman laugh. Not the polite laugh, not the managed laugh of a man trying to make his friend feel heard. The full, genuine laugh of someone who has just received information that delights him completely. You're shouting, Taman said, still laughing. You're shouting and calling a woman beautiful on the very first day. The therapy is already working. How? It is not funny. It is honestly very funny. Junwoo, this is the first real emotion I have heard from you in months. She made you feel something that's progress. I am definitely not going back. Silence on the line. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that passes between two people who know each other well enough that one of them can say something and the other can let it sit there without needing to argue with it. Junwoo started the car. He drove home through the Seoul evening, the city lit and moving and entirely unbothered by whatever was happening inside this particular vehicle, and her face stayed with him the entire way. He turned it over in his mind the way you turn over something you cannot put down. He could call her many things: presumptuous, infuriating, the specific kind of right that arrives before you are ready for it. But unskilled and ugly were not among them. He could not call her either of those things. And that, somehow, was the most irritating part of all. That same evening, Elena came home wanting nothing more than to talk to Taesung. She called. The phone was busy. She sat with the silence of her apartment and the distance between them that kept getting wider no matter what she did. He was the reason she had stayed in this country, and now he had made her the loneliest black woman in Seoul. Her friend wasn't available either. But Elena always understood. She always told herself people were busy, that she was asking too much, that she should not need so much. She had been gaslighting herself about the loneliness for so long it had started to feel like her own idea. 3 days. That was how long Junwoo stayed away. 3 days of telling himself he was done with it, that he had tried and it had not worked, and Taman could find another way to worry about him because he was not going back to that office. 3 days of sitting in his apartment with the drink he kept picking up and putting down. 3 days of his own silence. And her face in all of it. He could not explain it. He had walked out of that office furious, and he had driven home, and he had sat in the apartment, and somewhere between the first evening and the third, he had stopped being furious, and started being something he did not have a clean word. 4. The word difficult was still there. I hope you love yourself enough to heal, was still there. The specific way she had looked at him, not with fear, not with deference, not with the performance of care that he had learned to recognize and distrust, just with the full, steady weight of someone who had already started understanding him before he opened his mouth. He could not make any of it leave. On the third evening, he picked up his phone. He told himself he was going back because of what Taman had said. He told himself he was going back because the alternative was another evening alone with a drink he did not need. He was good at telling himself things. He had been doing it for months. But the truth, the part he was not ready to look at directly, was simpler and less comfortable than any of that. He knocked. She told him to come in. He was dressed differently this time. Not the armor of the first visit, not the expensive jacket and the pressed shirt of a man who had decided to perform composure before he even walked through the door. He was in softer clothes. His face was calmer. He looked like a man who had made a decision he was not entirely at peace with, but had made anyway, and was done pretending otherwise. She looked at him from behind her desk. "I'm glad you're back," she said simply. "I'd love for you to start and finish this journey." He sat down, and he started to talk. The room was quiet. Elena had her notebook open in front of her, but she was not writing in it. She was just listening, fully, completely. The way she listened to everyone who walked through that door, but this time, something in her was paying attention in a way that went past professional, and she did not examine why. He started at the beginning. When he was 20 years old, that was when he met Sun-jin. He said her name quietly, the way you say the name of something that rearranged your whole life. He told Elena how beautiful it was at the start, not just Sun-jin herself, but all of it. The life he was building, the man he was becoming, his father's company, waiting for him. Sun-jin beside him, the future so clear and certain, he could see the shape of it from where he was standing. He had believed in all of it, completely. He had been so young, and so sure, and so completely, foolishly in love. She was so nice then and beautiful. I was so foolish to fall for her the way I did. "Don't ever blame yourself for loving anybody," Elena said. She said it gently, the way you interrupt when the interruption is the most important thing the session can do. But there was something underneath the words that went slightly past professional, something personal. Like she was not only saying it to him, like the sentence was reaching two people at the same time, and she was one of them. "It is not on you what they chose to do with that love. It is on them." He looked at her for a moment. He nodded, and he kept going. He told her about the marriage. He was 20-5 years old when he married her. He had loved her so much. He had put everything into that marriage, his time, his attention, the private parts of himself that did not belong to the company or the family name, the tender parts he had never shown anyone before. He had tried in the way that only a man who genuinely believes in something tries, without reservation, without calculation, without keeping anything back for himself. And then his father died in an accident, 3 years after his marriage. It was the worst year of his life. He needed Sun-jin in those months more than he had ever needed anyone in his life. She was not there. What she did instead was cheat. And every time he looked up from his grief, every time he surfaced from the worst pain of his life, long enough to speak to his wife, she had one question for him. "When are you finally taking over the company?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I am here." Not, "Tell me what you need." He was standing at his father's grave. He was learning how to breathe without the person who had always been there. And she was beside him, calculating what the inheritance was worth. Tears started forming in his eyes. He was ashamed of them, immediately, reflexively, the way a man is ashamed of tears when he has spent his whole life being told that pain is a private matter, that grief is something you manage quietly, that you do not come undone in front of anyone, and certainly not in a small office in front of a woman he had only met once before. She reached across the desk and set a handkerchief in front of him. "You are allowed to feel hurt, you know," she said. "Men can feel pain. When things like this happen to you, remember that you are a human being first, before you are anything else. And human beings feel pain." She looked at the time. Over an hour had passed. Without making it a conversation, she moved her other clients to the next day and told him he had the whole day if he needed it. He needed it. He told her everything. How he had tried to hold the marriage together even while he was falling apart inside. How he had found the messages on her phone one evening. That specific sick feeling of reading words that confirmed what his body had been telling him for months and that his mind had refused to believe. The late nights he had questioned her. The way she had turned every complaint he raised back on him, calling him difficult when he asked where she had been, calling him difficult when the pain got too loud to stay quiet about, using that word like a door she could close in his face every time he tried to walk through it. He had started to believe her. That was the thing that broke him most, sitting here now saying it out loud, that he had started to believe that the problem was him, that he was too much, that his grief was an inconvenience, that the right thing to do was to manage himself better and ask less and need less and be smaller. And then she came to him 3 months before the divorce to tell him that she was pregnant. He had just taken over the company, his father's company, the thing his father had spent his life building, the thing he had been working toward for years, the thing that was now, finally, officially, irreversibly his. And she came to him with this news in that same moment. He had celebrated 2 full months of it, 2 months of believing that something was going to be saved after all, that whatever had broken between them could be made whole again by something new and real and theirs. He had talked to that child in the quiet of the apartment. He had held the idea of it like something he was afraid to damage. He had loved it before it was born. And then she asked for the divorce, out of nowhere, saying she wasn't happy in the marriage anymore, and insisted that he had to pay for child support. But the divorce did not go the way Sunjin thought it would. She had walked into that courtroom with accusations: domestic abuse, infidelity, rape. She had said, all of it, put it on record. Made him sit there and listen to a version of himself that he did not recognize, that had nothing to do with the man he actually was, that she had constructed carefully and coldly for the sole purpose of walking away with everything she could carry. He laughed slightly when he told Elena this part. Not because it was funny, but because saying it out loud, hearing the words in his own voice, in this small, quiet office, broke something open in him that he had been keeping sealed. The absurdity of being accused of things by the person who had been destroying you. The exhaustion of having to sit in a room and defend your own decency. But none of her accusations flew. His lawyers were able to expose the real truth, that she was the one cheating, that the accusations were constructed because she had no proof to back what she was saying, that they lived in a house with CCTV cameras and there's no clip of her being abused by him, that she was not owed anything, and that she'd be lucky if she wasn't arrested for lying in court. She walked away with nothing she had not already taken. And then she looked at him in the corridor outside. After the divorce ended, she told me she was not going to let me win, he said. His voice was very quiet now, that even if she lost, I would lose too. He looked at nothing, some point on the wall, some middle distance with nothing in it. She told me she would abort the child, that I would not be able to get custody. He stopped. I had already fallen in love with that child. The room held that sentence for a moment. Elena did not move, did not speak, just stayed completely present with what he had just put down in front of her. Even after all of that, even standing in that corridor, with those words still in the air, he had not wanted to let go, because of the child. He was still holding on to that, still believing it was his, still willing to stay in whatever was left of that marriage, if it meant the child would have both parents. Jungwoo's mother had to sit across from him and tell him to learn his worth, to stop bargaining with a woman who had decided to use him as a tool and discard him when the tool was no longer needed, to let go. At some point, he listened to his mother. He let go. And it was only after everything was signed and finished and legally done that the last piece of the truth arrived. Sunjin had someone else, had always had someone else, a man she actually loved. She had come to Jungwoo not because she wanted him, but because she needed something from him. She needed him to take over his father's company. That was the plan, from the beginning. Stay until the inheritance was his, then leave and split it. She had never been his wife in any real sense of the word. She had been waiting. She played the long game, he said. The tears were coming freely now, and he was no longer trying to stop them. He was done stopping them. But she played with my heart. He took a long, deep breath. I found out 3 months ago the child was not even mine. He laughed. The broken kind. The kind that comes when something is so enormous and so impossible and so completely devastating that the body does not know what else to do with it. The laugh that says, look at what I have been carrying. Look at what loving someone cost me. Look at what 10 years of my life turned out to be worth. I laughed when I found out, because how could it have been mine? We were barely together. She was never comfortable around me. He stopped. Sometimes, I remember how much I irritated her. How much she was willing to wreck me. And I cry, because I loved her so much, and she hated me just as much. The tears were falling, and he looked at Elena across the desk and smiled through them. The exhausted, open smile of a man who has been carrying something enormous, alone, for a very long time, and has finally, in this small, quiet office, set it down. You don't have to pity me, he said softly. You're the therapist here, remember. Your emotions should be in check. That was when Elena realized she had been crying. She had not noticed. She had been so completely inside what he was saying, so fully present in every single word of it, that she had not felt the tears arrive. She touched her face and found them there, and something shifted in her expression, the startled, unguarded look of someone who has been caught feeling something they did not plan. Oh, I'm sorry, she said, and a small surprised laugh came with it, soft and genuine and entirely real. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. He could not help but look at her. How beautiful she was even like this. How soft. He had walked into this office 3 days ago with his whole chest armored against beauty, certain it was dangerous, certain it was the costume that damage wore. He had been so sure. And now he was sitting across from a woman who had cried without meaning to, not because it was her job to seem moved, Not because she was performing care, but because what he had carried into this room was genuinely worth crying over. Because she had been so completely with him in it that his pain had reached her before she could stop it. He had not known that beauty could look like that. Like someone who simply could not help but feel what you were feeling. He looked at her and said nothing. He just looked. She asked if he was done, and he nodded quietly. The small smile on his face was not about anything she had said. It was simply about the fact that she was beautiful. Maybe that was what made the place feel safe. Or maybe it only worked on him. She told him he was the victim, and did not need to keep victimizing himself further. There's nothing that will make you feel better more than understanding that Sun Jin was who Sun Jin was, a greedy person. And she would have been like that to anybody. It wasn't you. It was her. She told him they would start with the good memories, that writing down what he had loved about Sun Jin would help him understand that it hadn't all been damage, that there had been real moments, real love, that loving her had not been stupidity, and that the same capacity to love that Sun Jin had not valued was the same capacity that would find someone who did. They talked for a while longer. He smiled at something she said near the end, just slightly, just enough, and then he left. He called Taemin from the car and started to tell her how the therapy was actually working. I knew a beautiful face would make you rethink your ways, Taemin said immediately, laughing. Taemin. What? You told me yourself she was beautiful. I haven't even seen her. Or shouldn't I believe my best friend? They both laughed. Taemin held his breath for a moment after the laughter died, listening to the sound of his friend, laughing out loud for the first time in what felt like years. He said a quiet prayer for Elena Stefan, because she had done this. Whatever she had done in that office today, she had brought his friend back. Junwoo kept coming back. Elena kept giving him assignments. He kept doing them. He came back the following week with 3 pages of good memories about Sun Jin, the moments that had been real before they were not. She looked at the pages. She looked at him. You wrote 3 pages, she said. You said to write down the good memories, he said. They were good memories. She looked back at the pages and did not let him see what crossed her face. The thing a therapist feels when a client does the work properly, which is not quite pride, because it is not hers to take, but is adjacent to it. He improved in the way that only happens when someone is actually doing the work, not performing healing but actually moving through it. He was sleeping better. He was answering Taemin's calls the same day they came in. He was eating real meals. But somewhere along the way, he shifted from needing the therapy to simply needing to be in the room with her. Sometimes he would watch her lips move while she was talking and realize he had not heard a word she said. He noticed things he had no business noticing. The way she moved her pen when she was thinking, the way she made tea without asking him if he wanted some, and just put a cup on the table for him because she had noticed that he drank it. The way she occasionally said something funny without intending to, and then immediately tried to put her professional face back on, as though the funny thing had not happened. He knew she was a miss. That meant she was not married. But it did not tell him what he actually needed to know, whether she was single, and he could not ask directly. He knew her well enough by now to know exactly how that conversation would end. She would look at him with that calm, professional expression. She would redirect, and the door would close before he had even finished the sentence. So he found another way. One day during their session, he told her about a coffee shop, a place he and Sun Jin used to go to every Saturday morning without fail. Their ritual, their table, their order, that the staff knew before they sat down. He told her that now, every single time he drove past that street, something happened in his chest that he could not move through. That he had started taking different routes just to avoid it. That he had added time to his commute just to not drive past a coffee shop. Elena looked at him. She could see exactly what he was doing. She was a therapist. She saw everything. She knew this was not entirely about the coffee shop. And she knew he knew, she knew, and neither of them said any of that out loud. I know you probably have some kind of assignment for something like this, he said, but I have an idea I would love to suggest. She nodded for him to continue, because she had grown fond of him and his progress, and she was not going to pretend otherwise to herself, even if she would never say it out loud. I want to make new memories there, he said. He was looking directly at her face when he said it, watching for the moment she understood. Let's have our next session at the coffee shop. She smiled at him. Mr. Junwoo, I'm not single, but I don't think your suggestion is a bad idea. In fact, I think we should meet there for our next sessions, until you can pass that place without feeling pain. His eyes lit up. He could not believe she had agreed. Honestly, neither could she. But she was lonely in soul, and as much as she knew this was not entirely professional, this was good for him. Mostly for him. That was what she told herself. The coffee shop sessions were different from the office sessions. Not in the content, they covered the same ground, did the same careful work, but in the office, there was a desk between them and a professional frame around everything. In the coffee shop, there was a small table and 2 cups of whatever they ordered, and the ordinary afternoon noise of a Seoul neighborhood going about its life, and the distance was different. She noticed that he laughed more easily here. She noticed that he watched her when she was looking at her notes. She could feel it the way you feel a gaze, not intrusively, but with the warmth of someone's attention, resting on you without pressure. When she looked up, he was always looking somewhere slightly to the side, which was the behavior of a man who has been watching and has just adjusted his eyes half a second before being caught. She also noticed that she had stopped watching the clock. She looked up one afternoon and realized they had been talking for an hour and 40 minutes, and she had not noticed, and he showed no signs of noticing either. They were not talking about Sun Jin at that point. They were talking about food. He had asked about a dish she had described eating the previous week, and she had answered, and he had responded, and somehow 40 minutes had passed before she caught the time and reached for her notebook to anchor the session back in its purpose. He caught the gesture. He looked at her notebook and then at her. "We went somewhere," he said. "We did," she said. "I don't mind," he said, and the way he said it was not about the conversation. She looked back at her notebook. One evening, Sun-yu came to Taesung's house looking angry. Not the quiet, managed kind of angry that she usually carried. The real kind. The kind that had been building for a while and had finally run out of patience. "You always say you're done with her, but you're always still dating her," she said, the moment he opened the door. "It's a relationship, Taesung. Get it over with." Taesung looked at her. He did not love Elena anymore. That much was true. But he did not love Sun-yu either. Not in the way she wanted him to. He saw her clearly, desperate, bitter, calculating, and that clarity was the one thing that had kept him from fully committing to her. A woman who wanted him this badly was not a woman he wanted. He had been keeping the relationship with Elena alive partly to keep Sun-yu at a distance, and partly because he genuinely did not know what he wanted yet. He was a confused playboy. That was the truth of him. That had always been the truth of him. "I can't leave Elena," he said. "She's in a bad place." He knew he was lying when he said it. Sun-yu looked at him with the expression of a woman who has had enough of being lied to by the same mouth. "You are in a relationship with someone who is with a different man every day," she said, "and you prefer her over someone who has loved you, been with you, and is now pregnant with your child." Taesung was shocked at what he heard. She lifted her phone. A photograph. Elena at the coffee shop across from a client, laughing, leaning forward, looking like someone who was not suffering without him at all. Sun-yu had taken it herself. She knew Taesung well enough to know she would not need to say much. She just needed to put it in front of him and let him do the rest. "She moves from taking care of their emotions to taking care of their bodies," Sun-yu said. "And you are still with her." She turned to leave. He grabbed her back. Something had shifted in his face. The photograph, the pregnancy, the accumulated weight of Sun-yu's patience, finally running out. Whatever calculation he had been making in his head for months had just landed somewhere final. "I want the baby," he said. He looked at the photograph one more time. "And don't worry about her. I'm done with her. I should have listened to you a long time ago. She's a cheat." He said it with conviction, with anger even, as though Elena had done something to him. As though the photograph was proof of something real, rather than a therapy session that Sun-yu had been standing outside a window to take. That was Taesung, a weak man who would accept anything that would make him look like the victim. The next day, Taesung came to Elena's office uninvited. She was shocked to see him. She had surprisingly missed his face over the past weeks, a feeling she had not expected and did not fully know what to do with. "Hey," she said, genuinely happy to see him. He did not return the warmth. "I can't do this anymore," he said, like he had practiced it. "You're never there when I need you. You're too busy, and I don't trust you." "I'm too busy? You literally don't reply to my messages. How am I too busy?" "I don't want this anymore, Elena. It's obviously not working, and you know it. I'm tired of pretending that it is, and I'm sure you are too." She looked at him. She had been sitting across from Junwoo for weeks now. She had listened to him describe in detail what it looked like when you begged someone to stay who had already decided to leave. She had heard what it cost the person who begged. She had seen what it did to a man's dignity to ask and receive nothing, because the decision was made long before the conversation began. She would not beg. "Okay then, Taesung, I guess it's over," she said, and looked back at her book. He stood there. He had expected a fight. He had expected tears. He had expected something he could use. She gave him nothing. He stormed out. She closed the book she had not been reading. She canceled every appointment for the rest of the day. She sat in the quiet of her office, and she cried, not for who Taesung had become at the end, but for who he had been at the beginning. For the man at the library who corrected her pronunciation and made her feel butterflies for the first time. For the person she had stayed in Seoul for everything she had built her future around. She called her mother. Stella answered on the second ring. She said nothing immediately. Just, I'm here. I'm here. I've got you. And Elena cried on the phone to her mother from a small office in Seoul on a Thursday afternoon in the way that she had not cried since the plane had taken off from Indianapolis. When she had finished, Stella talked. She reminded her daughter that she was 24. That 24 was not the end of anything. That the things she had built here, the practice, the reputation, the knowledge, the years of doing work that mattered, none of that was Taesung's. None of it left with him. You are going to be okay, Stella said. You have always found your way through. This is no different. Elena wiped her face. I know, she said. I know you know, Stella said. Just like before. Elena almost smiled. After the call, she sat in the quiet of her office for a while longer. She reached for her phone and called Sun Yu. It rang out. She called again. Nothing. She put the phone down and sat with the silence and understood something she had not fully understood before that moment. She had known she was lonely in Seoul. She had always known it. It had been there since the first night in the campus housing room with the photograph on the desk and the wall. But she had always had Taesung, and she had always had Sun Yu, and those two things had been enough to make the loneliness feel manageable. Now Taesung was gone, and Sun Yu was not picking up, and the silence in that office was the loudest thing she had heard in a very long time. She had not realized until that exact moment just how completely alone she actually was in this city. She went home. One evening, Elena went to the supermarket to restock her apartment. She was moving through the aisles with the focused efficiency of a woman who has decided that keeping her life running is the one thing she can control right now. When she saw them, Taesung and Sun Yu, holding hands, she hid in fright before she could stop herself. She couldn't believe it. Were they together? Was this why Sun Yu wasn't answering her calls? She stood there for a moment, tears fighting to come and losing because she would not cry here, not in this supermarket, not in front of anyone. She walked to the register. That was when Sun Yu saw her. She walked over with Taesung beside her, and his arm through hers, holding it the way you hold something you have won. Hey Elena, it's been so long. Of course it has. You're with him now, right? You've always wanted what I had. Well, enjoy my leftovers. Elena snapped at her. Sun Yu smiled. Leftovers? Didn't he break up with you? Ooh, Taesung said, looking at Sun Yu with a grin. Baby, do you have our wedding invite? No, but we could give her the virtual one, Sun Yu said. The world slowed down. Elena stared at them as the message arrived on her phone. A wedding invitation, 2 weeks away, both their names at the top. So Sun Yu still had her number, had always had her number, had never once called in all those months. They watched her face for the reaction they had come to see, victoriously, like this moment was something they had planned. Sun Yu said something in Korean as they walked away. Taesung laughed. Elena's Korean was good enough now. She understood every word. Her legs were shaking. She couldn't believe what she had done for these people, all the sacrifices, all the years. She left without the groceries. She could not stay there a second longer. She was scared that if she did, she would break down right there, in the middle of that supermarket aisle, and she was not going to give them that. She got in her car, and she drove. And while she drove, everything started to make sense. The change in Taesung, the way he had started pulling away, the complaints, the accusations, the way Sun Yu always had a reason to be near him, always showed up at the right moment, always seemed to know things before Elena told her. Sun Yu was not just a bad friend. She was envious. She was jealous. She had wanted what Elena had from the very beginning, and Elena had been too lonely and too trusting to see it. She had handed Sun Yu everything, her time, her trust, her relationship, and Sun Yu had taken all of it with both hands and smiled while she did it. She drove recklessly because she was angry. She got home in one piece. And what shocked her when she got there, what she had not expected, was that she could not cry. She sat in her apartment and waited for the tears, and they did not come. She was angry, and she was hurt, but she could not find it in her heart to shed a single tear. All she felt was the burning, just the burning anger sitting in her chest, with nowhere to go. She could even have forgiven Taesung for cheating, But marrying someone she had introduced to him? That was something else entirely. She did not call Stella. She did not feel the need to. She just sat with the burning and the uncertainty for a long time, done with soul in a way she could feel in her bones. But having built too much here to simply walk away, and not knowing what to do with that contradiction. Tomorrow she had work to do, so she would do the work. That was all she knew how to do. A week later, Elena had a session scheduled with Junwoo. He was doing so much better. She could see it in everything. The way he carried himself when he walked in, the way he answered her questions without the defensive edges that used to line every word, the responsiveness, the warmth that had been buried underneath all that damage and was slowly finding its way back to the surface. Even Taemin had sent her a message, a short, simple thank you, because he could see it too. His friend was coming back. For some reason, Junwoo still booked an appointment twice a week. She did not know why. She told herself it was part of the healing process, that some clients needed the consistency of regular sessions even after the acute pain had passed. She told herself it was professional and appropriate and entirely normal. But she looked forward to their meetings in a way she did not look forward to any other appointment on her calendar. And sometimes, she would look up and realize they had been talking for much longer than the session required. Not about Soonjin, not about healing. Just talking. And Junwoo had a lot to say when he was no longer hurting. He was funny. He was sharp. He noticed things and said them directly and made her laugh at unexpected moments. And then she would reach for her notebook to bring them back to the work, and he would catch the gesture and smile like he knew exactly what she was doing. She always pretended she did not notice the smile. Junwoo, on the other hand, could not stop talking about her to Taemin. He did not mean to. It just kept happening. He would call Taemin to talk about something else entirely, and somehow Elena would come up. Something she had said, something she had done, the way she had looked at him when he said something that surprised her. Taemin, as usual, made fun of him for every single word of it and told him he had been right all along and that he should have listened to him from the beginning. Junwoo always said, "Stop it, Taemin." Taemin never stopped. The truth was that Junwoo had fallen head over heels for her, and he knew it, and he could not do a single thing about it, because she was not single. She had told him herself, "Mr. Junwoo, I'm not single," and he had been holding those words at arm's length ever since, trying not to examine them too carefully, because examining them led to places he was not supposed to go. He looked forward to their sessions the way he had not looked forward to anything in years. The sessions were the only time he could talk to her without it being something it was not supposed to be. And so he kept booking them. One more day of sitting across from her in that small office or at that coffee shop table. One more day of watching her reach for her notebook when the conversation went somewhere personal. One more day of pretending he was not counting down the hours until the next one. He was fighting with himself constantly. The day of their scheduled meeting at the coffee shop, he received a message. Brief, professional. The location had been changed back to the office. He looked at the message for a long time. A million reasons moved through his head for why she might have changed it. A scheduling conflict. Something practical. Something that had nothing to do with him at all. He put the phone down and picked it up and put it down again. She had told him during their sessions that overthinking from a place of past trauma could destroy something fresh before it had a chance to become anything. He had taken that seriously. He had been practicing it. He was not going to overthink this. He would just ask her why she changed the location when it was time for their session. He drove to the office. When he came in, he saw her face and he knew immediately that something was wrong. The warmth was gone. Everything in her expression was closed off. Official, professional. The face of a woman who had decided to put every available distance between herself and the person sitting across from her. She asked him how he was doing. She asked what he wanted to talk about. She looked at her book, and she did not look at him. He sat across from her, and he tried. He answered her questions. He gave her what she was asking for, but he was tired of playing it safe. "Why did you change the location for our meeting today?" he finally asked. "Because I can," she said, still not looking at him. "And because it's highly unprofessional meeting you like that." Her heart was aching, and she knew it, and she knew she was punishing him for something another person had done to her, and she could not seem to stop. "Elena," he said, just her name, not Miss Elena, not the title that kept the professional distance exactly where she needed it. Just her name, said the way he said it when he was actually talking to her, when there was no performance between them, when he was simply there, and she was simply there, and the desk was just a desk. She looked up instinctively and met his eyes, his beautiful, warm eyes. And then, quietly, without warning, against everything she had been holding for a week, the tears started. She could not understand it. She had not been able to cry since the supermarket. She had sat in her apartment and waited for them, and they had not come. She had wanted to cry, and she could not. And now Junwoo had said her name, and something had cracked open inside her, and she could not stop it. Was it because she could now understand exactly what he had felt when the person he loved destroyed him? Was it because she finally understood betrayal from the inside, the way she had only ever observed it from across a desk? Was it simply the way he said her name, like she was a person and not a professional, like she was allowed to feel things? She did not know. She just knew she was crying and she could not stop. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping at her face. He looked at her calmly. His heart was breaking for reasons he could not fully name, but one thing he knew, with complete certainty, was that he would do everything in his power to make sure she was not crying. "You told me it was okay to cry, and it was okay to feel," he said quietly. "Take your own advice. Stop apologizing for feeling." And that was when she broke completely. Her phone started ringing. She looked at the screen. Her mom. Everything was happening at once. The tears she could not stop, and her mother calling, and Junwoo sitting across from her watching her fall apart in her own office. "Can you please leave? I need to take this." He looked at her like he had not heard her. Then he shook his head. "I don't mean to intrude, but you have taken care of me. Now let me try to take care of you." She looked at the screen. She looked at him. She let the phone ring out. It was true. She had been listening to everyone else's pain and solving everyone else's problems, and her own had been sitting right there, looking at her the whole time, and she had not let herself stop long enough to feel it. She let the phone ring out, and she started to talk. She told him about the breakup 2 months ago. Junwoo felt something move through him quietly when she said the relationship was over. He was already thinking about how he would end the professional arrangement between them and properly get to know her. He knew that was not what he was supposed to be thinking while she was crying. He knew it, and he could not stop it. And then she said the word cheating, and he came back entirely. He knew what that felt like. He knew it from the inside. He looked at her calmly, and he continued to listen, because what she needed right now was not a man who was falling for her. What she needed right now was a friend. She told him they were getting married. He stood up. He walked around the desk. He held her while she cried against his shoulder. This woman, who spent every day helping other people carry their heaviest things, and had been carrying her own entirely alone. "They invited me to the wedding," she said, crying against his shoulder. "They had the audacity to invite me, and I didn't even do anything to any of them." He pulled back to look at her face, her beautiful face that tears could not touch, that was somehow still the most beautiful thing he had seen, even like this. He looked into her eyes, and he said what he meant. "You are the most amazing woman I have ever met. Whatever they did is because they are bad, not because of you. They do. I told you that," she said, and laughed through the tears. "That's to tell you I was always listening," he said. He was hurting for her, but he was glad he could make her smile. He put her back in her seat and returned to his. She told him this was the first time she had actually cried about it. He asked to see the invitation. She showed him her phone, and he looked at it with a slow, quiet smirk. "I think you should go." "Are you crazy? How much more do you want me to torture myself?" she asked, laughing despite herself. "You used to tell me to face my fears head on, and because you went with me to the coffee shop, I'll go with you to the wedding. What half?" She stared at him. "Are you asking to be my date to my ex's wedding? Do you want me to be your date to your ex's wedding?" He looked at her in a way she could see clearly, even through the tears. She went quiet. "I mean, if you don't want me to be your date, I can just be your +1. No rush." "But Elena, I want to go with you. I want you to move on from all of this. I want to be there for you, the way you've been there for me. I was there for you because you paid me. It's my job. Well, I don't want you to pay me, and it's not my job. But I'd love to go with you. I want you to know you're way better than them." The thought terrified her, but her growing feelings for him terrified her more. "I'm your therapist, Junwoo. That ends after this session," he said back. She surrendered. "Okay then." He came to her apartment the next day. She was not surprised he had found the address. He was Junwoo Han. A man with that kind of money and that kind of reach did not struggle to find an address. She had always known this about him. She opened the door, and there he was, and she stepped back to let him in. He looked around her apartment. She watched him look at it, at the bookshelves covering one whole wall. The books organized the way her mind organized things, by subject, and then by the specific order she had needed them at different points in her training. The desk, by the window, with the notebooks stacked on it. The small kitchen that still smelled faintly of whatever she had cooked the evening before. The photograph of herself and Stella on the corner of the shelf, both of them at the airport, Stella's eyes red from crying, both of them smiling anyway. He looked at all of it with the quiet, careful expression of a man who is learning something about a person from the room they have built around themselves. His respect for her, already there, already real, grew in that moment. She was doing very well for herself. Everything in this apartment said so, not loudly, just with the quiet certainty of something built by someone who knew exactly what they were building and why. "I brought you this," he said, setting a clothing bag on her table. "It's a wedding. I want you to turn heads." She came to pick it up smiling. She had already had something in mind. She was not the kind of woman who went unprepared. But when she opened the bag, what was inside was more than she had expected. She held the gown up and looked at it and looked at him. "How did you know my size?" she asked. "I guess I've stared at you long enough," he said simply. She realized how close they were standing in the small kitchen. He looked at her face. He took the gown from her hands carefully and set it aside. And then he held her waist, gently, with the carefulness of a man who is aware of exactly what he is doing and is making sure she has room to decide what she wants to do. And he said, "You don't know how much I like you, Elena." He said like the way you say a word, when the word you actually mean is too large for the moment. She heard both words, the one he said and the one underneath it. Her heart was doing something she was going to continue, not examining, because examining it would require her to admit things she was not ready to admit. "You wouldn't want to go to a wedding without learning how to dance with your +1, he said, and he smiled. He began to move, slowly, his hands on her waist, her hands finding his shoulders without her deciding to put them there. They just went, the way hands go. When the body knows something, the mind is still catching up to. The two of them moving in the small kitchen to no music at all. Just the sole evening outside the window. Just the sound of the city that had not been built for her but that she had built something real in anyway. She did not think about the wedding. She did not think about Taesung or Sunyu, or the invitation on her phone, or the burning anger of the supermarket, or any of the things that had been sitting in her chest for weeks. She was just here, in this small kitchen, dancing to nothing with a man who had walked into her office difficult and furious and broken, and had done every single piece of work she gave him, without complaint, without excuses, and who was looking at her now with the expression of someone who has already decided something and is simply waiting, patiently, for the right moment to say it out loud. They danced to nothing for a while. Then he left. She stood in the kitchen after the door closed and looked at the red gown on the table and pressed her hands flat against the counter and breathed. She had been falling for him for weeks. She could see that now, looking backward from this kitchen moment, the shape of it becoming clear in retrospect, the way certain shapes only become clear when you have enough distance from them. The coffee shop sessions she had not wanted to end. The sessions in the office where she forgot to watch the clock. The way his name in her appointment calendar had started to feel different from the other names. She was falling for him, and he was still technically her client. And he was a Korean man who had spent 10 years with a Korean woman, and she was a black girl from Indianapolis who had stayed in Seoul for a man who had chosen a Korean woman, and she was terrified. She reached for her phone. She called Stella. Stella listened to all of it. The breakup, the grocery store, the wedding invitation, Junwoo, the dress on the kitchen table, the dancing to nothing, and she was quiet for a moment after Elena finished. "Baby," she said. "I know," Elena said. "No, listen to me." Stella's voice was the voice she used when she was saying something she needed Elena to actually hear. "I don't know who this man is, but the way you're talking about him, I can see you really like him. Don't let what has happened in the past stop your future." Elena said nothing. She looked at the dress. "I'm scared," she said. "I know," said Stella. "You're allowed to be scared and go anyway. You've been doing that your whole life." He walked out of her building, still smiling. He could not stop it. She was so perfect for him. The specific way she moved, the way she listened, the way she had looked at him in that small kitchen just now, like she was trying very hard not to feel something she was already feeling. He was scared. He could admit that to himself, sitting in the car with the engine running and Seoul moving past outside. He was scared of falling the way he had fallen before, of giving everything to a person and finding out too late what the everything had been worth. But he was also glad. Glad that he could still fall. Glad that the part of him that knew how to want someone had not been destroyed along with everything else. He deserved this. She deserved this. And he would wait for as long as it took for her to trust him, because she was worth the waiting. He picked up his phone and called Taemin. "I have a date on Saturday," he said. "Already going out? You player!" Taemin shouted. "It's with Elena." Silence. "Elena?" Taemin's voice shifted. "You know it's not legal to date your therapist." Well, technically we are not dating. I'm just her plus one. Junwoo, the way Taemin said his name, calm, steady, the voice of a man who loves his friend enough to say the hard thing. You wanted me out there and happy, Junwoo said, and she makes me so happy, and I want to be out there with her. Taemin was quiet for a moment. He was genuinely happy for his friend. He could hear it in Junwoo's voice, the specific warmth of a man who has found something real, but he also did not want this to hurt either of them. What do you want, Junwoo? He finally said. Arrange 7 cars, Junwoo said. I want to make this event something the bride and groom will remember. You want to take the spotlight from the people getting married. A pause. That's evil. No. They deserve it, Junwoo said calmly. I'm doing it for her. Taemin was quiet again. Then, you've really fallen. Fall safely. I don't want another repetition. Junwoo listened. He sat with it the way he sat with things that mattered, quietly, without deflecting. But the one thing he knew about Elena, the thing he felt every time he was in the same room as her, every time she laughed at something unexpected and then tried to pull her professional face back on, every time she looked at him with that full, steady attention that she gave to everyone, but that landed on him like something specific, was that this felt safe and seen and completely, entirely right. It could not be like Soonjin. It simply could not. The morning of the wedding, Elena stood in front of her mirror in the red gown and stared at herself for a long time. She had come to Seoul on a scholarship from Indianapolis. She had been lonely and homesick and had built something anyway. She had loved a man who left. She had trusted a friend who lied. She had kept going. She had kept building. She had sat across from a furious, broken, beautiful man, and she had helped him find his way back to himself, and in the process, had not fully noticed that he was helping her find something too. She looked at herself in the mirror. She was ready. The knock came. She opened the door. He was in a black suit, perfectly fitted, the kind of suit that looks like it was made for the specific person wearing it, and in his breast pocket was a red rose, the exact red of her dress. He had not told her he was going to match. He had just done it. She saw it when she opened the door, and something moved through her chest that was warm and specific, and not going anywhere. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment before he said anything, and what crossed his face in that moment was not the performance of admiration. It was the real thing, the involuntary thing, the thing that arrives before you decide to let it. You're beautiful, he said. He said it the way you say something that arrived without being invited, simply because it was true, and he had said it before he could decide not to. She felt the warmth move up her face. Shall we? She asked. They walked down to the street, and she saw the 7 cars lined up behind the limousine. Junwoo, this is too much, she said, scared by the scale of it. That was the plan, he said, opening her door himself, even though there was someone there to do it. I want them to understand what they gave up when they decided you were someone they could treat the way they treated you. She looked at the cars. She looked at him. She got in. The convoy moved through Seoul on a Saturday afternoon. 7 cars, the city continuing around them, the street food stalls, and the apartment buildings, and the ordinary Saturday life of 10 million people, and then the venue, coming into view. The people standing outside in their wedding guest clothes, turning their heads at the sound of the cars arriving. Someone lifted their phone. The limousine door opened. Elena stepped out in red. She stood on the pavement, and she looked at the entrance of the venue with the expression of a woman who has decided something, not performing the decision, not constructing it for an audience, just having made it somewhere private, and now carrying it into a public space. She was here. She was dressed in red, in a city that had cost her significant amounts of herself. She was standing next to a man who had learned her size from looking at her and had danced with her in her kitchen to no music. Junwoo stepped out beside her. His hand found the small of her back, the way it had the first time in the opening of this story, naturally, without announcement, like it had always been the right place for it to be. They walked toward the entrance together. Inside, Sunyu was near the floral arrangement at the venue entrance when the sound of the murmuring reached her. She turned. She saw Elena. Everything in Sunyu's face went still. The smile stayed. Sunyu was too practiced to lose the smile in public. She had spent her whole life managing what she showed in rooms, but behind the smile was something that was not happiness, and was not surprise, and was the specific, quiet devastation of a woman who had been certain she had won, and is now standing in the evidence that winning is more complicated than she calculated. She looked at Elena in the red dress. She looked at the man beside her, at Junwoo Han, because she knew who he was. Everyone in certain circles of Seoul knew who he was, and something crossed her face in that moment that she would not have allowed if she had been prepared for it. It was not quite regret. It was the shape of regret, the flash of understanding that arrives when you look at what you destroyed and understand for the first time the full value of what you destroyed it for. She had wanted what Elena had. She had taken it. She was standing in her wedding venue on her wedding day with the things she had taken, and Elena Stefan had walked in with a red dress and a convoy and Junwoo Han's hand on her back, and Sun Yu understood something about the word one that she had not understood before. She looked at Elena for 1 second, one private second, before the composure came back, and the look was not malice. It was something more uncomfortable than malice. It was hate and frustration. How dare she do better? Elena was not looking at her. Elena was walking to the front row. Taesung saw her when she sat down. He was with his groomsmen near the ceremonial arch. The ceremony was beginning. The guests were finding their seats. The formal machinery of a wedding was moving forward with the momentum of an event that has been paid for and cannot be stopped. He was looking at his guests, the way a groom looks at his guests. And then he was looking at the front row, and he saw Elena Stefan in a red dress, with Junwoo Han sitting beside her, and his face did something that it had no business doing on his wedding day. He looked at her for too long. The ceremony began. Junwoo leaned toward Elena's ear. "He's looking at you." His voice was low. To anyone watching, it looked like a whispered intimacy between two people at a wedding. His lips were close to her cheek, and she felt the warmth of his voice against her skin, and her stomach did the thing it had been doing in his presence for weeks that she had been very carefully not acknowledging. "Let him stare," she said. She kept her eyes forward. She kept the smile exactly where she wanted it. "He never expected you." Taesung stood at the arch to take his vows. He had practiced them. He stumbled over a line in the middle, and Sun Yu's jaw tightened beside him, and the guests shifted in their seats slightly at the stumble, and Taesung recovered and kept going. But the stumble had happened. In front of everyone, because a woman in a red dress in the front row had made him lose his place. Sun Yu was furious in the contained way of a woman who cannot be furious in public, and is using every resource she has to contain it. She finished her vows perfectly. She stood beside her husband and she smiled at the guests, and she did not look at the front row again. They were married. The reception moved them all to a larger room. Music, drinks, the choreography of a wedding reception, the toasts, the first dance, the gradual relaxation of formality as the evening progressed. Junwoo took Elena's hand. She looked at him. "You wouldn't want to come to a wedding and not dance with your +1, he said. She laughed. A real one, the kind that surprised her, and let him lead her onto the floor. They dance the way people dance when they have already been dancing to nothing in a small kitchen, and this is just the version with music and an audience, naturally, without performing it for anyone in the room. He held her the way he had held her in her apartment, like she was something he had chosen and was not planning to put down, and she let herself be held, and for a little while the wedding and Sun Yu and Taesung and everything that had brought her here simply fell away. He noticed when she laughed at something, he said that her shoulders had dropped. He noticed that she was not scanning the room. He noticed that she was here, actually here, present and light, in a way he had not seen her in weeks, and something moved through his chest that he did not try to name. He was looking at her face when he felt the shift in the room behind him. Taesung was coming. He had been drinking. Not enough to be incoherent, but enough to have given himself permission for whatever he had decided to do. He stood at the edge of the table, and he looked at Elena with the expression of a man who is angry at someone for not suffering enough. "Elena." She looked up at him calmly. "Leave," he said. "You have no shame. This is my wedding." "You invited me," she said. "You and your wife." She said wife, the way you say a word when you want it to land with its full weight. His jaw tightened. "Not to bring the man you're sleeping with, you cheat." He did not finish the word. Her hand connected with his face before he could. She gave him a resounding slap. The room went quiet. "You are a bitter person," she said. Her voice was level, not loud. She did not need to be loud. She had learned from years of therapy sessions that the most devastating things are said quietly. "I wasted my breath on you. I stayed in a city that was not mine for you. I cooked food I barely knew how to make, and I rearranged my life, and I believed every single thing you told me about who you were trying to be." She looked at him. "Isn't the perfect Korean woman enough? Why are you still bothered about me?" He stared at her. He hated that she had moved on. He hated the man standing behind her, but he could not touch her. Junwoo's people were right there, and Taesung was many things, but he was not foolish. Junwoo held her hand gently. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Let's leave," he said to Elena. "It's a bore anyway." She let him take her hand. She took one step with him, and then she stopped. She turned back, not to Taesung, to Junwoo, and she took the front of his jacket in her hand. and she kissed him. It was not planned. It was not for the room or for Tae-sung, who was standing there with his jaw tight, or for Sun-yu, who was somewhere across the room, watching with the expression of a woman who is standing inside every consequence of every choice she ever made. It was not for any of them. It was for herself. Because she was standing in the place where her worst year had been lived and she was still here, she was not broken. She was not the woman who had cooked Korean food she barely knew how to make and reduced her hours and begged a snake to speak on her behalf. She was Elena Stefan, and she was in love with this man, and she was done waiting for a better moment, because this moment was the one she had. One part of Junwoo was completely entirely thrilled. The other part was thinking, here? Now? In this room? In front of all these people? He kissed her back anyway, for a moment. A full, real moment. Then he pulled back gently, his hands finding her face, his voice very quiet against her lips. Let's leave, Elena. She looked at him. She understood his uncertainty. She understood that she had done that in the middle of a room full of people at her ex's wedding, and that it was not the most careful thing she had ever done. She understood all of it. She nodded, and she walked out with him. His hand holding hers, her back straight, her chin level, the walk of a woman who has decided that the only direction worth moving is forward, and is moving in it. Behind them, the room was the specific quiet of a room where something has just happened that everyone present will spend the rest of the evening talking about. Behind them, Tae-sung was standing with his hand pressed against the cheek she had slapped. Behind them, Sun-yu was watching the exit, with the expression she had been holding all evening, the one that was shaped like regret, and was not quite it, but was close enough to make her uncomfortable in her own skin. The door closed behind them. They left the wedding exactly as scattered as it deserved to be. In the car, Seoul moved past the windows, quiet between them. I'm in love with you too, you know, Elena said, her voice calm, looking at her hands. He turned to look at her. She kept talking. I'm just scared of giving myself to someone who would eventually choose another Korean woman. I felt not enough once already. And I know I'm the therapist who's supposed to have everything together, but that's not really the truth. She was talking more than she meant to, and she couldn't stop. He reached across. He took her hands in both of his, not urgently, not dramatically, with the gentleness of a man who has been learning for months how to handle things that matter. He held them, and he looked at her, and he said, from the moment I walked into your office, I knew you were going to be a problem for me. She looked at him. Not in that way you think, he said. In the way that things are too important to you, and I knew if I let my guard down, you'd be so important to me, and I've let all my guards down, Elena. He looked at her hands in his. You made me feel something on day one, when I was certain I was done feeling things. You gave me back something I had been trying to find for 2 years in an office, and a bottle, and long hours of work that I thought was keeping me together. He paused. And I am not going to sit in a car and tell you that what you're afraid of will never happen. I can't promise you the future. She looked at him. But I can tell you, he said, that I am done with a version of my life that does not have you in it. I looked at you in your kitchen, and I looked at you tonight, and I have been looking at you for months, and I see you, and I love you. He looked at her directly in the way she had learned was his most honest register. No deflection, no performance, just Junwoo Han being completely present in a moment. I love it here, he said, with you. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she moved across the seat, and he put his arms around her, and she pressed her face into the shoulder of his black suit jacket, and he held her steadily, without condition, with the warmth of someone who has decided and is not going to undecide. Outside, Seoul moved past. Inside the car, it was the two of them, and it was enough. From that day, it was the two of them in the way that real things are, not dramatically, not with declaration, just with the accumulation of ordinary evenings and phone calls and meals, and the ease of being with a person who already knows the important things about you and has decided to stay anyway. She was his safe space, and he was hers, not the professional kind, the real kind. The kind that shows up on a Thursday evening and says, "How was today?" and means it, and is still there when the answer is longer than expected. Somewhere in Seoul that same Saturday evening, Sun Jin was sitting with her phone. She did not follow Junwoo. She had stopped following him after the divorce because she did not want to see what surviving her looked like on him. But someone had posted the convoy. 7 cars outside a wedding venue in Seoul. The comments were full of people asking who the woman in the red dress was. His name was appearing in places it had not appeared in a long time. She opened the photographs. Junwoo's face in those photographs was the face she had not seen enough of in 10 years of marriage. Open, warm, looking at the woman beside him in a way that made it very clear what she was to him. Sun Jin looked at the woman in the red dress for a long time. She closed the app. She sat with what she was feeling, something that was not love. She knew it was not love. It had not been love for a very long time. It was something older and uglier than love. The feeling of a person who was certain they had ended something and was now looking at evidence that the something had not ended at all. She had said it to him in the corridor outside the courtroom. Even if I lost, you lose too. She had believed it completely. She opened the app again. She looked at the photographs again. She stared at this woman in a red dress, standing in the frame like she belonged in every frame Junwoo would ever be in from this day forward. And slowly, quietly, Sunjin began to think. So tell me, did Elena do the right thing slapping Taesung at his wedding? And what do you think Sunjin is planning? Tell us in the comments because we read every single one and we love hearing from you. Also tell us if you like our stories because we take our time to write them for you. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell right now because part 2 is coming and you do not want to miss it. See you there. And do not forget, click the link in the description below to join the waitlist for our free ebook, How to Attract a High-Value Man Without Chasing. We will see you in the next story.